all the wrist-like explanations are so easy, but you never see a forehand that looks quite like Roger Federer's. But Coach Steven, everyone says I need to stay relaxed when I hit the ball. So clearly you're wrong. We're going to end with a drill you can do in literally the next 60 seconds. What's going on, guys? It's Coach Steven with 15 Points of Tennis. And see, everyone wants to hit the ball like Roger Federer with the stylish and sexy wrist lag. And I've seen some players here and there do it okay-ish, but it's really not that common. So today I'm going to break down why it's not so easily replicable. But I'm also going to discuss and explain the different pieces required, 3 key elements in particular, for you to actually do it successfully. See, while your forehand will probably never look quite like Roger's, the proper wrist technique can give you increased both power and stability through contact. Now, I've also seen a lot of players do this incorrectly, right? A lot of wrist lag and wrist whip with very poor results, especially going from drills to a live ball scenario. I'm talking about mistiming, shanking, the coordination is very hard, right? Destabilization at contact, etc. Okay, so if you enjoyed the first video on the series of the wrist that laid the foundation, this video is going to take it to that next level and go one step deeper. Okay, so without further ado, if you haven't, like and subscribe if you enjoyed these more technical based videos. Let's get started. Now, before we get into the minutia, let's recap. Okay, so when we talk about the kinetic chain, I'm talking about ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, elbow, wrist. The wrist is the last piece of the kinetic chain to snap through, to come through and fire through. All right, so first we get everything loaded and we get all the joints coiled and loaded, which involves cocking the wrist back right here. Now, the swing happens so fast that a lot of times the arm is accelerating forward. Here you see the arm moving forward as the wrist is dropping backwards, right? Now, in moments before contact, look, moments before contact, all my joints have uncoiled except for my wrist, which is still laid back. And only at the very last second, the wrist comes through. Okay, now, if you have a very slow swing, you probably won't get this moving in 2 directions at once, visible wrist lag effect. It really won't be that pronounced. This happens all within literally a split second. All the joints getting coiled, loaded, the legs start to push, followed by the shoulder. Then you can see as the arm moves forward, the wrist is still laid back and fires at the very last second, bringing the swing around. Now remember, guys, your wrist is merely a joint controlled by your forearm muscle, right, which extends and contracts to give your wrist movement. Remember, joints don't move by themselves, and I've said this before. Just like my knee is a joint, my knee doesn't move unless I really push with my quads. You see, I've heard all kinds of things that, okay, the wrist just whips through all by itself and that it's passive. And yes, as we swing, we build momentum like dominoes via the kinetic chain, but no, it is incorrect. A limp forearm like this will not utilize my wrist properly. The same as like a limp quad, I can't use my knees. I need to engage my quads to use my knees. So guys, this is a limp forearm. I can't hit the ball effectively like this because with a limp forearm like this, there's no culmination of energy at contact. That's why this piece, the last piece of the kinetic chain being the wrist, is the most important, the wrist controlled by the forearm, right? But even if I isolate my body and I were to go like this, yeah, I can't hit the ball super hard, but at least I can hit the ball because there's some culmination of energy at contact. I wasn't even sure how to demo this, but this is my limp wrist, my limp forehand. And as you can see, I'm getting some power from me moving my body and my shoulder, but there's really no culmination of energy into the ball. It's unfocused. As compared here, my body is even more still, but because I'm moving the tip of the whip even just a little bit, and the tip is where the power focuses, I'm getting some power. So for me to isolate the forearm muscle right here and move the tip of the racket, this takes some forearm strength. right? And same thing, when you watch Federer get tremendous racket head speed with his super short backswing, it takes a ton of strength. Now, one more thing before we begin. All right, when we talk about wrist lag, okay, it involves essentially getting the extension back here with the wrist, the range of motion with this joint. I can also have very little to no wrist lag and still be engaging this forearm in a big way. So you obviously see the more flat ball hitters like Delpo and Sampras, they don't have a whole lot of wrist lag and wrist whip, but they're still using their forearm strong through the ball. And again, either way, this is the last piece in the chain. Now the muscles in your forearm also control your fingers, which grip the racket. So when I hit the ball, I need to keep the racket very strong, straight, still, and quiet through contact. Otherwise, if I don't keep it straight and quiet through contact, if it's vibrating and shaking, I can't aim and I can't hit the ball with strength. And this is what we refer to as grip strength, which is your ability to squeeze the grip tightly and firmly with your fingers. So you guys, if I'm playing maybe like with a 5-year-old using red balls, I can kind of dangle the racket. Yeah, if I'm playing a 5-year-old, no big deal, right? Kind of like if you think of the claw from Toy Story, that mechanical arm that never has enough force to pick up the prizes at the arcade, right? But look, if someone rips a serve at me 120 miles an hour, I'm like, ugh, I have to squeeze that grip pretty tightly, pretty firmly, so it doesn't vibrate, shake, and fly out of my hand. Same thing if I'm ripping a forehand, all the force that's created, I need to squeeze pretty tightly, especially at impact. Right? And what I'm trying to say is, guys, if you have zero grip strength, it's the same thing as letting go of the racket. So the question is, yeah, we say to hold the racket lightly, loosely, relaxed, but where do we draw the line here? Okay? Federer, when you think about it, he has incredible grip strength, okay? Because he has to stabilize that contact. There's so much force coming, and also to move that tip incredibly, incredibly fast. When you think about it, racket head speed does not generate itself. So Roger, to do it with this heavy of a racket, he is very, very strong. So if you're curious why tennis players have big forearm muscles, yes, we use these squeezing muscles a lot. Now, obviously, you're a little bit more relaxed prior to contact, but even as I set up on the unit turn, you have to hold the racket with some amount of strength to keep the racket still and quiet. You see a lot of players, especially low-level players, their racket is already bobbing and wobbling in their hand, and it's already destabilizing before contact. And this whole stabilization, the gimbal is stabilizing the camera that you're using to watch this video so it doesn't shake around as you're watching, all right? So you got to stabilize, and then there's even more of a squeeze right here at contact, okay? Like when you watch Roger, or any of the pros really, when they move, you see how still the racket is because it's stabilizing in their hand, and that does take a little bit of grip strength. And obviously when Federer meets it, he's meeting force with force, and he's keeping it so strong and stable because the ball is coming so hard, really, to keep that racket straight through impact. Okay, and guys, I know maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but this concept, okay, try and do your loosey-goosey wrist lag, loose grip forehand. First, have someone hand feed you. A hand feed has zero weight on it, it's very easy to hit through it. It takes no strength to hit through it. Then have someone go on that far and feed heavy balancing topspin feeds or rip the ball at you. And that heavy ball, hard and deep, now you're going to find out very quickly that your loosey-goosey wrist lag soft grip won't work very well. And yes, people hitting hard into your strike zone, it's going to strengthen your grip. All right, and what I'm trying to really explain here, guys, I know it's overkill, but I don't think people realize why all the wrist lag explanations are so easy, but you never see a forehand that looks quite like Roger Federer's. Right? Professional athletes that are so unbelievably strong. And people don't realize the impact strength has on technique. Like you watch, even take another sport like basketball. Look at Curry, Durant, LeBron, they can just flick that ball like this from 40 feet away accurately, while most of us would have to heave the ball up, right, and maybe just barely hit the rim. And that's a big, big difference.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang!
Now on the topic of strength, both these heavy balancing topspin feeds and gripping and ripping, and to generate your own pace, will improve your grip strength. Now the student you see here, he's been playing tennis a long time and he's more advanced, so it looks quite easy for him to stabilize the racket at contact, especially off these heavy balls. But my more beginner to intermediate level students, they have zero chance of returning some of these heavy balls because they don't have the strength, the forearm strength. And just like anyone, now I'm going to hit him another heavy ball here. Over time, the muscles break down, it will destabilize. But Coach Steven, everyone says I need to stay relaxed when I hit the ball. I can't be stiff when I hit, so clearly you're wrong. Okay, but let's get into the nuance of this topic. Okay, and really the first key piece to Federer's unbelievable wrist lag. And I'm going to demonstrate that by doing what's called the handshake test. Okay, so we're going to shake hands, not like we're doing business. And what I want him to do is squeeze my hand with his fingers as tight as he can. Okay, but keep so he's squeezing with his fingers right here, and that engages his forearm muscle, right? But what I want him to do is to keep this joint of the wrist relaxed and loose as he squeezes. See, the fingers are for your grip strength control. So this is for stability and control. This is for speed. So I'll try again. So I want him to squeeze. Now I'm going to move his wrist. See how his wrist is locked? Even squeeze tighter, tighter, tighter. See how it's locked right here? Now squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Now he's got to relax. Relax as you squeeze. No, see how he locked again? So I'm going to do it now. So hold my hand right here. I'm going to crush his hand and then boom, right? See that? How I can squeeze it with my fingers and keep my wrist joint from locking. And players either do one of two things. They either lock their wrist and squeeze with the fingers, or it's just all loosey-goosey, right? So you've got to get this muscle control where you can keep this loose yet squeeze. And the tendency is to do both, right? So you see players obviously, right, they have all the racket head speed, but because they don't have grip strength, they have no stability through contact. Or you see the players with grip strength and they have stability through contact, but they're stiff like this and they have no racket head speed, right? So to get both, it's not easy, and you really need to, again, this wrist will lock naturally as you squeeze, but you want to keep it as relaxed as you can. Now the second key piece to Federer's wrist lag is how he holds the racket. So grab a racket wherever you are to check your finger position. Now the ideal way to hold the racket is with your fingers spread open like this and with your index finger up. Similar to if you're holding a violin like this and your fingers are open to maximize both speed and control. Okay, so you see Roger hold his finger with that index finger pretty high, just like this. You see this index finger pretty high. And holding it like this, it takes a little bit more forearm strength and grip strength to really keep this stable. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we see what's called, a lot of the players hold the racket in a way like they hold it like a club. We call it like a club grip. You see how my fingers are clenched together with my knuckles very straight, right? It's not the worst thing in the world per se to hold it like a club, but you can already feel your wrist a little bit more locked and a little bit less feel. Now, the last thing Federer does holding his grip, and this is really the third piece, what separates him from the rest of the pack, and very few people do this. When Federer holds the racket, he holds unbelievably low on the grip. So just holding here versus here, like half a centimeter lower, it makes a huge difference in terms of, as you hold lower, it gives the racket so much more leverage, right? So much more range of motion, and the snap is unbelievable, is so much greater. So check out the range of motion, okay? So I'm going to choke up even just a little bit. Watch my racket. You see the range of motion I can get doing this lag here, getting this extension. It's not bad, but look, I'm going to hold where Federer holds with his pinky on the very bottom of the grip. Look at the range of motion now. This is way more. And Federer, he gets that wrist so far back, You know, it's incredible. Now, it's very similar to what Sampras does on his serve, where Sampras' pinky is dangling off the grip like this. The Sampras pinky serve, bang, here. And I mean, it's hard to compete with a guy that strong with that huge of a lever. So go out there, try it. You're going to be able to get way more pop on your serve with that extra leverage, with that pinky off the grip. But keep in mind, both what Sampras and Federer do, holding lower, it's going to put a lot more work on that forearm. It's going to tax this muscle. You're going to probably have a huge forearm by the end of it.
Again, Federer.
Now, before you go out there onto the court, I want to put the whole idea of the wrist extension into a little bit more perspective, okay? I do a video that talks about the shoulder dominant swing versus a wrist dominant swing. I'll put the link there. Go check that out for a little bit more information on a kind of related topic. All right, but when we're talking about using more or less wrist lag, you see typically the players who hit more spin on a regular basis get more wrist lag, wrist whip. Obviously, because they need more racket head speed to create spin and dip that ball and create more margin of error over the net. All right, the downside of a lot of wrist lag and racket head speed is, although you create more margin over the net, you create less margin at contact. It's harder to time, and a lot of times you're brushing up. You just have less margin to hit the ball, so shanking, mistiming, framing, that can also come into play. On the other side of the spectrum, you get the flat ball hitters, like a Del Potro or Sampras. As you see, these players, they don't need much wrist lag because they hit very flat. And hitting flat, in and of itself, there's so much velocity through the court already that they're more focused on stability through impact. So those Del Potro and Sampras, although they're hitting much flatter, they are still really engaging this forearm right here to keep this stable through contact, right? But if all these flat ball players use a lot of wrist lag and wrist whip like that, again, I think it would be a little too much power to control on a consistent basis, and especially the margin for a flat ball hitter, they can't aim 4 or 5 feet over the net and expect it to come down. Okay, so me personally, because I hit flat, I don't use a whole lot of wrist lag and wrist whip. But situationally, okay, if I get a sitter in the court, a short ball, okay, a float slice that pops up like this, even on my backhand, okay, I will I'll get a little bit more snap here because I need to move this tip a little faster to get more speed through the court to put the ball away. So situationally, yes, I will. And generally speaking, okay, for the scenarios, if the ball is a little slower and you're generating pace, yeah, use a little bit more whip. If someone's ripping the ball like a return, right, or a volley, you're not going to use a lot of lag on a volley, right, because you're using pace. So if you're using your opponent's pace, there's not going to be a whole lot of wrist lag, okay? But again, mind you, a lot of this depends on your level of strength. And you see Roger kind of do it all the time. So it's highly dependent on your level of strength. And I would say for the average player, myself included, I throw myself in that bucket. It's not very practical. On a practical level, there's so little margin on these flat shots. Any more power with generating more racket head speed with wrist lag, I would say is completely unnecessary. And that's why you see Sampras, Delpo, a lot less wrist lag because they don't really need it. It's all about stability. Now, throughout the video, you saw me hit forehands that are whippy with a lot of wrist lag and a lot of spin. That, for me, is completely unsustainable, and it puts so much work and tax on my forearm, my forehands started to break down completely. Now, obviously, I don't train. I hit a two-handed forehand. But if I were to compete with a one-handed forehand, I would use a stroke you're watching now, something much more simple, a little bit more shoulder, some wrist, but not too much wrist, because it has to be sustainable in a match. Me doing that crazy whippy forehand was fun to experiment, but it wasn't very consistent. And because I'm not that coordinated, when I do use a little bit more wrist lag and try to flatten the ball out, I can't control it. I'll send a lot of balls flying, the timing is hard. But for Fed, this is what happens when he hits the ball flat with wrist lag. He'll destroy the ball. But wrist lag can be practical if you need to bend the low ball up and down. and wrist lag can be practical if there's a floater or sitter in the court. Yeah, I think I can time that pretty well, pretty consistently. It's not too bad. And it can be practical, again, if you really get your feet set, maybe off a floater slice that's dipping, you need to load up more. Or if you see it really well, you'll take a chance to put a little bit more crack on that ball. And like I said, my tired forearm muscle broke down and started to completely fall apart, and that's why you watch this guy play, not me play. And yes, this isn't the most practical. You can do amazing things with a wrist lag, but Federer is strong enough to put balls away with spin. I'm not. What we're going to do, because we talked about the importance and how important this is, we're going to end with a drill you can do in literally the next 60 seconds to improve your forearm strength and your grip strength. Okay, so we're going to do dribbles on one knee. So I'm going to get down right here on one knee. Now the lower you go with the dribbles, the more it's going to work the forearm. And the lower you hold on the racket, the more it's going to work the forearm. So hold the end of the racket, okay, as low as you can go, and keep the ball as low as you can. Keep the hand still and make sure you're moving the tip. Right, this is going to work the forearm. Right, so we're going to go one minute. Set the timer. You can even do it right now, and it looks easy. Now hold it nice and low. Don't let the ball come up too high. All right, but this is going to highly improve your grip strength and your forearm strength. And go strong and steady for 1 minute. You're going to know when you start slowing down like this. That's when the muscle is getting tired. Then switch and go on the backhand. Now backhand you can choke up a little bit more. Right here. And then go 1 minute. All right, same thing. Moving the tip of the racket, working the muscle. Great on a rainy day to keep your strokes sharp. So thanks guys for getting this far in the video. I know if you watched the first video I did explaining the wrist, I talked about not muscling the ball specifically. And this is where players get confused, because although you don't want to muscle the ball, it takes your muscles to be able to accelerate the kinetic chain properly. So yes, feel, coordination, timing, those are all essential pieces, but do not miss this key ingredient of incorporating strength. Okay, it's an underlying theme in everything you do regarding technique. All right, so in the last video, there's one more piece of the series where I'm actually going to explain my favorite technique, because all this great forearm work we're doing and focus on the wrist, I'm going to explain my favorite technique to really help you culminate and focus all that energy at contact. It's going to be the last piece. I'm really excited. Subscribe and hit that bell, notification bell, to make sure you get it, and we'll see you on the next video.